Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our presentation of survey designs. I am Kalinda Theobald.
And I am Nicholas Brenholtz.
So let's get started. First of all, a little bit about the history of surveys. They came about in the early 1800s. The earliest known survey was by Marc-Antoine Julien de Paris, and it was 34 pages long, which is a really long survey, and it surveyed national education systems. Now, it continued to develop through the 1800s, but our modern survey as we know it came about between World War I and World War II. And the Likert scale, which is what we think about whenever we answer strongly agree, strongly disagree, was something that came along and greatly improved our surveys as a whole.
Is survey the best option? A survey design should be used when identifying beliefs or attitudes, and there are two different approaches to the survey design. You could assess from just one point in time, which is a cross-sectional survey, or you can assess data over a longer period of time, which is a longitudinal survey.
Now let's look a little bit at a cross-sectional survey design. It can be used to do the following. Examine current attitudes, beliefs, opinions, or practices. Also, it's used to compare two or more educational groups in regard to those categories mentioned above. It can also measure community needs for educational services, which is great for us teachers. It can evaluate a program, and it can also be used on the large scale internationally to survey a geographic area.
There are three different types of a longitudinal study, the first being a trend study, where it identifies a population and survey changes in that population over time, such as high school seniors. Whereas each high school senior will eventually grow up and move on, the actual group of a high school senior consistently stays the same. A cohort study identifies a subpopulation that has a common characteristics and study them over time. So this could be like studying an 18-year-old in 2001 and then 5 years later in 2006 are studying 23-year-olds. But they aren't necessarily the same people, just as long as they have the same age as the others. The third is a panel study where it identifies a subpopulation and study those exact same participants over time, such as if you were to study a Kalinda Theobald in 2001, you would also study Kalinda Theobald in 2006.
Now, a few important characteristics of survey research that need to be considered through the process. First of all, you sample from a population, and some of those populations were given as examples in the previous slide. Also, you collect data using questionnaires or interviews, design an instrument to collect that data, and obtain a high response rate. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into all of those.
You can conduct your survey through a questionnaire or an interview. In a questionnaire, a participant will do most of the work for you. They'll be the one that completes and returns all the information that you're asking sent back to you. They'll also be the one that fills out the questions, whether it's the questions that you're looking for from the survey or specifically about them demographically. And this could be through the mail or online. An interview, it tends to be more where the researcher does the majority of the work, where the researcher will record the answers from the participants, and they can be quantitative, where they're closed questions, or qualitative, where it's more of an open-ended question. They can be conducted through one-on-one interviews, a focus group, or a telephone conversation.
Now we're going to look a little more closely at one of the more common questionnaires, a mailed questionnaire, and what you need to do in this process. You start the whole process by writing a cover letter to announce yourself to the participants and make it a formal invitation to make sure that they are actually willing to participate in the study. You want to use closed-ended questions about the participants' background so they can be very specific about the demographic. Use closed-ended questions about respondents' practices and behaviors and attitudes as well. And finally, you want to use open-ended questions for respondents' perceptions and opinions to get a well-rounded response. Finally, you want to write closing remarks to say thank you for your time to your participants. And with a mailed questionnaire, just because of the type of questionnaire it is, you want to make sure you check back every 2 weeks for responses and resend if necessary.
In an interview, you will do a lot of the same as you would through a mailed questionnaire. You will need to remain neutral during the interview, but you will also ask formally an invitation for participants to participate. You'll set up a time and place that's nice and quiet and convenient for both of you, and you'll be the one that asks the questions, give the response options, and record the answers given. You'll keep the pace of the interview comfortable so it's not too quick and not too slow. And then you'll also thank them for their time and keep any information about them confidential, which will help reduce any ethical problems that arise later on.
Now we're going to take a brief intermission, so to make sure that you are having a brain break as you retain all of this amazing information about survey research. So please enjoy this musical interlude. 1, 2, 3, 4. Survey design is a favorite of mine. Let me tell you what I know. It has two kinds. Let's keep them in mind. Cross-sectional and longitudinal. You can mail them in, do them over the phone, or even go online. Just make sure you're ethical, evaluate the data, and you will be just fine. Yeah! Now, moving back to the content that we are going over with instrument design. Now, we don't want to reinvent the wheel when it comes to instrument design, so a few questions you need to ask yourself first. Is an instrument already available? Or can you modify one that already exists to meet your needs? If neither of these options are possible, then you need to consider the following. Make sure you write all types of questions, personal, attitudinal, and behavioral, to cover all your bases. Make some of them closed-ended, some of them open-ended, to get all of it covered. Also, make sure you use clear, concise language in your questions. Don't overlap answers, and make it applicable to all of your participants. Finally, you want to perform a pilot test of the questions to make sure that they are good to go before you actually give it a try.
There tend to be some common problems that happen during a survey design. A few of them, the big important ones, is that the question is unclear to the participant, or that there are too many questions that only are asking for one answer. The question could be negatively worded or includes jargon that the participants don't understand. There could be a mismatch between the question and the answers, such as, what color is the sky? 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then not all questions may even be applicable to the participants. We have a helper that'll help us write some good survey questions that you can view on your own time.
Now we're to the response rate. As far as response rates go for surveys, it's considered that 50% or more is a good response rate. You want to avoid response bias, which is when the same survey obtains drastically different answers over time. One of the ways to avoid this is to change and tweak the survey as you resubmit it over time to avoid those robotic answers. Also, make sure you're sending reminders every 2 weeks to encourage survey response. It's just good common practice to follow up to make sure that people are reminded of the fact that they're involved in the study.
There's a specific process to follow if you decide to go with a survey design. One, you have to decide if it's actually the best. Then you'll identify the research questions or hypothesis, and then find the population. Determine if the survey is what your procedures are, and you'll develop and locate an instrument. Then you'll administer the instrument, analyze the data, and then write the report.
Now, whenever you are looking at survey studies, one way to evaluate if it's a good study is to look for some of these things. Did they write a method section of the paper? Did they actually describe their target population? Did they use a systematic approach? Did they identify the size and means and the type of survey used within their study? Did they describe what instrument was used? And did they report the validity of that instrument? Did they discuss the procedures used? Did they discuss follow-up procedures for good response rate? And finally, did they use a systematic procedure for analyzation?
An example of a survey research is one that an assistant professor went to some high school choir programs. She wanted to determine student and director perceptions and attitudes of treble choral ensembles. She found that mixed choirs, where it has both males and females, are held to very high esteem, where the top performers get to be part of a mixed ensemble, whereas If you weren't, you were put into a lower choir. But because there were so fewer men in choral ensembles, that men got to go into the mixed choir more easily than females. And so the lower choirs tended to be all female, and females found that to be not fair. And so so the researcher interviewed students at several different schools and try to find their perceptions of the equity. And she found exactly what she knew that she was going to find, which is that females do not think that it is fair that because there are fewer men, their challenges to get into a top performing choir are easier than it is to be a female. And so what the directors at the specific schools, but everywhere, are now starting to have auditioned treble choirs where it's females only, and it's making it more equitable for females to participate in because it is also held up to high esteem.
Now, if you take a look at this slide, we took the previous slide about how to evaluate a good study and took it through the study that Nick just mentioned. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but please take a look at this as you also look at the link before mentioned for the study. And I would also suggest looking at the specific questions listed for the survey, because you'll find that there are some survey questions that maybe don't fit in with the 7 good tips for writing survey questions. So see if you can locate those.
Now for our quiz. Our first question. What are 2 approaches for survey research? Will you pick 2? A. Longitudinal. B. Mixed method. C. Latitudinal. And D. Cross-sectional.
Our second question, what is one difference between a questionnaire and a survey? This will be a short response question. Oh, sorry, a questionnaire and an interview. My bad.
Number 3. What is considered a good response rate? A. 40%. B. 10%. C. 50%. Or D. 30%.
Our fourth question, name one common problem in designing survey questions and how would you fix it? Another short response question.
Last but not least, which rapper did Kalinda remind you of? Eminem, Vanilla Ice, Tupac, or all of the above?
And we would like to end our presentation with a goodbye song for all of you. Survey research, give it a try today. You will love it, guarantee it, listen to what we say. Do, try survey design. Do, thank you for your time.